Let's now take you to this matter. The Department of Health has gazetted the explanatory notes for the Control of Tobacco Products and Electronic Delivery Systems Bill, which it intends to introduce to the National Assembly in the coming weeks. Manufacturers are concerned that too many regulations will impact the economy. For a discussion on this, we're joined by Lekan Ayo-Yusuf from the School of Health and Systems and Public Health at the University of Pretoria. Very good afternoon to you. Thank you for your time. Tightening legislation always seems to have one group satisfied and the other not so much, especially when it comes to business.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you very much for having me. This is not one of those businesses that we should really be worried about because this is a business that essentially sells a product. When used as prescribed or as intended, it's going to kill half of its users. So I'm not so worried about that as much as the tobacco industry naturally would be concerned. As it is currently, just to give you a picture, it costs the South African government about 42 billion rand. The cost of smoking, there's a direct cost of 14 billion for hospital bills for those who are sick, and you have another 28 billion from people who die prematurely and are not able to contribute to the economy, and another 900 million for those who are lost productivity because they have to take time to smoke at work. So that's a lot of money. On the other hand, the government collects 12 billion rands in excise taxes, and I must say, that's money from the pockets of the smokers, not from the tobacco industry, as they would like the public to believe. The 12 billion comes from smokers and excise, so basically they're just a tax collector. So it makes people even poorer by 12 billion. And the point is, when that money is not spent on cigarettes, the money does not evaporate. It goes to another product. And if you buy shoes or go to pay for education, there's also employment created in that alternative industry, and they will pay tax as like any other industry. So it is a myth to think if we do not have tobacco, the economy would be down. In fact, it costs South African economy 1% of the GDP.
What are some of the most significant changes we could see with the new laws once passed?
I think the most significant one that I think that members of public would see and would be glad to have is the fact that you would no longer be constrained by where you sit in a restaurant. As we know now, 25% of the restaurant space would be reserved as a smoking area, and usually the best part of the restaurant. So now you can actually sit anywhere and be sure that you're not going to get smoke moving from a smoking area to come to non-smoking area. Because research has shown that there's no way, there's currently no engineering or ventilation system that can actually keep the smoke away and keep it only in non-smoking area. So that's one good and obvious. Of course, even those who work in those spaces, they'll be very glad to see that come through. The other thing is obviously that you would not have this all glamorous advertisement at the point of sale when you want to buy a cigarette, because we know those are cues for somebody who wants to give up smoking. And you walk into a big store and you see all of these colorful adverts at the point of sale. If you wish not to buy a cigarette at that point, you just find it difficult to walk away. So all of those cues that make it difficult for you to stop smoking, and more importantly, the adverts and the cues that make young people to start would all be restricted.
I suppose one of the significant changes which could perhaps ruffle a few feathers is the ban on smoking in the workplace. Of course, depending on what you define as a workplace, because even smoking within your own home, near your domestic staff or other members of staff within your home, will not be allowed, because you would not be allowed to smoke in their presence within your own home.
Yeah, well, this is actually in line with international practice now. In fact, I was actually reading more recently. Perhaps it's important that we talk about the impact or effect of secondhand smoke at the time where we celebrating the Mental Health Day. There's been recent review of over 70 studies involving 21,000 people that have shown that even those who are exposed to secondhand smoke usually suffer from mental illness, things like depression, forgetfulness, and anxiety. So it is actually an important piece of legislation to protect everyone, particularly children who are not able to protect themselves, or domestic worker who is very poor and is not able to speak up to the employer, and that's where that comes through. Or your neighbor, because you share a vent. So if you're in a commune or a housing arrangement where if you smoke in your room, it gets through the vent to your neighbors and they're not able to stop it. That's what the law is talking about, and that's what is actually international practice, because it is indeed quite toxic when you get to secondhand smoke. So it's not about you on your own not being able to smoke, but you cannot smoke in the presence of a non-smoker.
Yeah. And I suppose what has really had a bit of a grey area where there's not been much certainty is the vaping space, the e-cigarettes, and the lack of knowledge and, or people who are non-smokers being exposed to vaping. How much of an impact will this new law have within that space?
Well, the law extends to vaping in public places as well, to the extent that we've already been able to demonstrate, and many studies have demonstrated that the aerosols that come from the vapes themselves are not safe, to the extent that they also contain some of the toxicants that have been shown to have cardiovascular risk in terms of hurting your blood vessels, the walls of your blood vessels. So therefore, the law also restricts using vape in the presence of others who are not vaping. More importantly as well, once you start vaping in the public space, young people, oftentimes, they're not able to distinguish whether the smoke is coming from cigarette smoke or is just a vape. So it does create this environment that also encourages either somebody who's trying to stop smoking or a young person who thinks this is fashionable. So actually restricting the public use of vapes and cigarettes actually bodes well for tobacco control in totality, and of course improving health of the public.
With the tighter regulations, I suppose we'll begin to see some of what emerged during the hard lockdown in the COVID-19 period, where there was concern that jobs are being lost and that the black market will now be able to thrive.
Well, I think it's important to clear the air. The tobacco industry have realized basically causing a lot of confusion. What we have is not a ban. And this is not the first time South Africa has introduced the law. Back in 1995, the current law was introduced, and the same scenario was that the industry basically painted a picture that this was going to be the end of the world. Essentially, that all the businesses, the restaurants, they're going to close. We all now know that this is just always an exaggeration. So it's not a ban. So what we have currently is a regulation of where you can smoke, and it has always been like that. People will still be able to buy their cigarette. There's no evidence. All the countries that have actually gone through the same process, there's no evidence that it actually increased illicit trading. The cost of illicit trading is linked to tobacco industry themselves. During the ban, the tobacco industry were allowed to continue production. And that was a mistake the state made. Now, you allow the industry to continue production on the assumption that they're going to export all of that production outside of the country. Of course, we all know what happened.
Yeah.
They all found their way into the country, within the country. So they're all illicit. It's all the tobacco industry was all part of that illicit, and it's all just crime. So we need to sort the crime, and SARS is doing very well these days. We all know this got a little worse a few years ago when the industry captured the South African Revenue Service. So we all know what is causing the illicit trading. And it is not, and I think I need to also make it clear, illicit cigarettes are not counterfeit cigarettes. There's a difference between counterfeit. Illicit cigarette could be counterfeit or the real cigarette. For South Africa, 90% of what we know as illicit cigarette are the same cigarette produced by the same tobacco industry, but taxes were not paid on them. That's what makes them illicit. So it does not matter whether you put them in a yellow pack or a white pack. If you don't pay tax on them, they are illicit. So there's no way that having this legislation on its own is going to increase illicit trade.
Very well. Thank you so much for clearing some of the misconceptions there. Lekan Ayo-Yusuf from the School of Health and Systems and Public Health at the University of Pretoria. Thank you for your time.